Spencer and Corey, welcome to episode 3 of Let Go Radio.
That's right, we're excited. Thanks for joining us today. We got some cool subjects for you. So today, guys, I want to mention a quote just to start this off here and see where we go with it. It's by Henry David Thoreau. Not a popular guy.
Never heard of him.
Never, right? And it states, "It is not enough to be busy. So are the ants. The question is, what are we busy about?"
Right, you have to realize that a lot of people will just want things to fill up their time. And I think we had talked about this before, how they'll just be, what do I do next? What do I do next? What do I do next? So they'll waste their time cleaning, or they'll have to call someone or turn on Netflix. What is it you're busy doing?
And why?
Right, why do you have to be busy? If there's not an aim or anything you're trying to do, but you still want to be busy, honestly, I think it's most people's fear of being alone with themselves and fear of having to face themselves. So they'll go and look for something to escape from that. It's the same reason we attach to identities. It's the same reason we do a lot of things. We want to belong to a group. We don't know why. We don't even bother asking ourselves why, just like we don't bother asking ourselves, what are we keeping busy doing? We just do it because it makes us feel safe.
And that's a really interesting point, Corey. I like what you said there. And it makes me realize that a lot of the time, we don't even realize the reasons we're doing these things. So it's not like we're sitting there in an empty space in our schedule, right? It's a Monday, let's say, you just got off of work, and you could be doing so many things, but you sit there and you look down at your list, right? Our infamous list that never ends. And you might be going, what am I going to do next? And I don't think this comes from a place of necessarily being aware of our pain, being aware of what we're going through, and saying, okay, I'm going to cover up the moments I'm afraid to be alone with myself by doing X, Y, or Z. I don't think we're aware of that, so I don't think it quite happens in that way.
No. People are definitely not aware of these things that they fear. It's like when I go to this example a lot because it rings true from my past. But when a guy's afraid to talk to a girl, he doesn't realize that it's even a fear. He just thinks he's shy, or, there's no way he's going to get her. He doesn't look at it as a fear. People aren't aware enough of themselves to go through those kinds of things.
Definitely, I can see that. I used to actually have a similar problem. And what I realized was when I would walk up to a woman, and we're both guys here, so, women out there, just turn this around for yourselves and use it the other way. If a man was supposed to approach you and you didn't know what to say or whatever it was. But in my situation, I used to walk up to someone I was really attracted to. By the way, guys out there, don't let that kind of kill your game, because girls actually love when you're shy. They think it's really adorable and cute. As long as you don't scream and run away, you're going to be fine. Just sit tight, even though you feel uncomfortable. But that's what I started to realize was if I didn't know what to say, that's okay. And the funny thing is, you could even say, look, I really don't know what to say to you, and, I just knew I had to talk to you. And then leave a little blank space there, and she's going to be like, oh, well, my name is this. And it's funny, because you just start a conversation by being honest with yourself. But I used to not be able to see that. I used to see it as an impossible situation, and I just didn't have the answer for it.
That's actually the answer to just about everything. That extreme form of honesty. Not just with yourself, but with others, that will lead you to realize any number of things about yourself. But imagine if you just walked up to someone and said, I couldn't help but notice you guys look really cool over here and you're having a great time. I just wanted to hang out with you and see if I could make a new friend. That wouldn't be weird at all. It would be weird because it's not the normal thing to do, but people would be like, okay, and you'd probably be welcomed in right away, But people don't think to just express these thoughts that they have.
This is true, and we see this every single day, and that really comes in every form of life, though. We use that girl example because that's something we've lived through, but like I said, replace that with anything. Anything you don't quite understand, but there's a reason that you can't obtain it. So let's say it's financial freedom. Let's say it's that job you've been wanting. Let's say it's this new position at your work or at a different company, or maybe you want to go to school and go to college and you don't see how you're going to do it. Well, the funny thing is there's always multiple answers. It's kind of like math. There's more than one way to get to things, okay? There's always more than one route. You can take the freeway, you can take the side streets. There's a lot of different ways and methods of getting to the same end result. And that's why, just to show you some proof in this, that's why there's millionaires who sell pencils. You would never think about that. If you thought of selling pencils, you'd be like, I'd make 20 cents. However, there's people who are millionaires selling pencils. So we can understand that it's not about what you're doing. It's really about how you're doing it, how you see how you're doing it. And that takes us back to that idea that rich and poor people both have 24 hours in a day. And it really has nothing to do with you being flesh and blood like everybody else and being a real person like everybody else, having real fears, real intentions, real beliefs about the world like everybody else. But what are you believing? What principles are you building these thoughts off of? And what lens are you looking through?
That's one thing I want you to keep in mind. Every belief that you have on the world is a belief that you've chosen to have on the world. It is your interpretation. And, of course, all interpretations are bullshit. And they're illusions. They're not actual reality. They are whatever you interpret. And an example of an interpretation would be anything that you say is good, bad, important. When you look at a person and say, oh, he loves me. Well, that's your interpretation of a given situation. And you can choose those interpretations and beliefs in ways that benefit you, in ways that do work with reality, but also work with you in whatever your internal aim may be.
Definitely. And one thing I really thought of there was that there is no such thing as the words we know them by. Okay, so it sounds a little crazy. We're going to get a little deep here, but bear with us because, this taught me a lot, and, I think you may be able to grab some from here as well. But, for instance, if you look at a tree, you call that a tree, right? There's many different kinds of trees, and that's how we get to know things, by the words and terms that we slap on them. However, if you talk to someone from another country, they're not going to call it a tree. They might agree with you. If they know English, they'll say, yes, it's a tree in your language. However, you guys have two different words to refer to the same object, the same DNA structure that you're looking at in the world. And I think the funny thing about this is things are not the words that we call them. They really aren't. There's something of their own. And all you can experience these things as is when you're right in front of them. And
this is actually a topic that we could be going on for hours about.
A long time.
I would actually like to stretch this out for as long as we have something to say about it.
I agree, yeah. Yeah, we'll try to keep it to our normal length, which seems to be around 35, 40 minutes. But we want to cover things, We don't want to cut things off when they're organic and natural.
Right,
so
this one particular topic is one that I feel very strongly about.
Yes.
Labels, concepts. They blind you.
Mm-hmm.
Like you use the tree as an example. When you see a tree, are you seeing that living thing in front of you, or are you seeing your concept of tree? There's a story that I've heard. I don't recall the teaching. I believe it was Krishnamurti, actually. When you teach a child the word sparrow, they'll never see that bird again. Mm-hmm. When they first see it, they see this thing flying around with wings, and it's magical, and it's amazing. And, you can imagine the look of wonder in a child's eyes when it looks upon something new. You walk by and say, hey, kid, sparrow. Kid says, oh, sparrow. Sees the same one the next day. He looks at that bird again and says, that's a sparrow. I know sparrows. Even if it's not the exact same bird he saw before, he's going to be bored with it. He says, I'm bored with that. And that's what concepts do to us. And that's not just we use tree and bird, but it's not just in nature. Those apply to people too. If you look at a janitor and see your concept of janitor rather than this living, breathing person in front of you who could every bit be an asset to you, be a friend to you, be a source of love, whatever, and you just see guy that cleans up messes, or I don't know how you see janitors yourself, but you might even talk to him in a different way than you would talk to the guy that you see as CEO. The guy that's earned that label, well, he gets all the respect because of the concept that you see him through, rather than seeing these both as people of value.
Definitely. And I want to introduce an idea here that's going to challenge these ideas. And I'm the one that started this conversation, and Corey knows so much about this, so I'd love to hear him talk about it. And now I'm going to challenge my own statement, which is, okay, if this is the case, right, that we're supposed to stay in awe of everything, then I would argue that this wouldn't be actually good for human nature necessarily, because here's why. Well, there's two different ways to look at it, because it can be extremely healthy and also not. Imagine you're a baby and you learn to walk. And for the rest of your life, every time you walk, you are so amazed by it that you can't do anything else. It means you can't walk and text. It means you can't walk and look at other things. It means you can't walk and... So you're so amazed and stunned by you walking that you're constantly staring down and looking at your feet walking. See, at some point, we have to move past these ideas, just like we started to crawl and then we had to walk, because you have to leave things behind in order to experience new things. And life is really all about experience. And that's open to interpretation as well. But
now, I do want to say, concepts and labels are wonderful for purposes of communication.
Yes.
For writing history books, for putting things down in text. They are very useful. But when you get psychologically frozen on them, you don't see reality. There's this was a Zen thing. Or no, it's actually from the Tao Te Ching. So it's Taoism. Those who see the 5 colors are blind. Those who hear the 5 musical notes are deaf. And that's all about being frozen in your concepts and your labels. It doesn't mean that you get stupid or that you actually forget what a tree is and the definition of tree were you to explain it to someone. But to be able to look at it and actually see a thing of beauty, a thing different from all the other trees. And also different from itself at any given moment, because this tree or that sparrow or that janitor is constantly changing moment to moment, day to day, just as you as a person are.
I love what you said there, because that's exactly where I was hoping we would go.
Mm-hmm.
It is about...
I saw that challenge coming. And I always welcome ideas, not just from Spencer, but from everyone out there. We welcome everything that we say to be challenged. Nothing should be accepted just because you hear it.
Exactly.
Scrape away doubt. Question us. Come to us with your questions. While we won't argue, we are open to open conversation. So any question we will answer, and we may question back.
Exactly. And honestly, powerful people ask questions. That's just the truth. Skeptical people often, when they have changed their mind, they become just as they were skeptical. That measurement, if you could measure that, let's say they were level 10 of skepticism, they will become a level 10 believer, because that's the effort they put into things, is either to resistance or acceptance. And a lot of the time, those people become so pro of that idea, meaning like they stand for it so much after they've rejected it, but they've looked into it and they've done the research. And if it turns out that in their perception, that idea has more merit than the one they were holding on to, they will enforce that idea. We're not talking about conformity here. We're talking about the opposite of conformity, which is questioning everything.
Which leads me to another great point here. You mentioned that the person that is a skeptic becomes a very firm believer. They attach themselves to that belief and they obtain their identity from it. When we are in adolescence, we're at the stage where we miss the security of childhood, but we're anxious about the ambiguity of adulthood. And so we are searching for our identity, and so we find something and we cling to it for safety, for security. And rather than flow with life and go with every step, we just become rigid and attached to these things, and we develop a fear of losing them, which is exactly the problem with these firm, rigid, unchanging identities. And we look for confirmation of this identity, not just from ourselves, but from other people. And we start needing their approval and their opinions to back up what we now think we are. Like we weren't that thing before, but now we've chosen to attach to something, so we've become that thing in our minds that is to us unchanging.
Now, and again, this is going to be, I think, the challenge episode, because I think we get places when we challenge stuff. So Corey, are you saying that if a man identifies himself with being a man, and all of a sudden he should let this thing go, that he should go with the flow of life, and if another man comes onto him, but he used to disagree with that kind of thing, the opposite sex and everything, what would we call that? Is that the flow of life, or is there some rules, regulations, and laws, natural laws to this stuff?
Now, see, that kind of thing, it all depends on your current state of being.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to say if you weren't gay before, go gay suddenly, but if you are now open to it, there's absolutely nothing saying you can't go for it. That's... You picked a touchy subject here, because I don't want to get into, what do I care? I'll get into it. Sexual identity, if you're feeling one way or the other, or confused or whatever, you don't have to have a set thing. If you're feeling that, well, maybe I'm this way, but society can't see me that way, who cares what society thinks? Like, do you the way you want to do you, and do whoever else whatever. But things like identifying with, what am I trying to think of here?
I don't know.
Like, what's one identity that someone just firmly clings to?
There's a lot of things. It's basically everything about life, and that's why my argument was actually to bring up things that we should cling to, because you have to cling to some things and you have to reject other things, and that knowing between the two is where pure emotional intelligence comes from and spiritual intelligence. For instance, if you want to base your life off of principles that lead you to a life of purity and sovereignty and peacefulness and gratitude and a life really full of things, you're clinging to an idea. There's never any definites or not definites in life. So we're clinging to an idea of these principles that will give you a life full of gratitude and those things. So the interesting part about it is there are things to cling to and things not to cling to.
Well, see, that's a pretty broad thing. I guess what I'm talking about is clinging to the specifics. Like, to say, I'm grateful for my oatmeal this morning, and then firmly attaching your identity to eating oatmeal for breakfast every morning.
Yes.
You're going to be real lost when you run out of oatmeal,
yes,
or when
true.
The option available is pancakes. I wouldn't consider it emotional clinging or attachment to be a person that lives in gratitude. To be grateful for a specific thing. To identify yourself as an unchanging Republican that just agrees with everything they say because you want to be seen as a Republican, that is what I consider an unhealthy attachment or clinging or permanent identity. The party changes. You change as a person. Some of your views will differ at different times in your life. As you learn different things, come across different information, you may flip-flop, you may come to different conclusions about things that you had believed in. And I want to emphasize, that's perfectly okay. You don't have to pretend to be anything that you're currently not to fit into a certain thing.
However, and I want to add another caveat to this, because we're getting
going
somewhere.
Back and forth here. I like it.
Well, yeah, no, because we're getting somewhere. We're definitely learning new and having new challenging ideas, and that's why I do this. I do this with myself, too, by the way. Everybody in the world talks to themselves during the day. If you do, you're not crazy. That is completely normal. And we can get into later on in other shows as to what you're actually doing when you're talking to yourself. There is actually something going on. But
I'm going to jot this down because I do want to address thoughts in the future.
And we're going to skip that right now because I want to add something. So if we are not meant to cling to anything and go with the flow of life, does that mean when the opportunity arises to drop moral obligations that majority of people agree with? Let's say...
Wow, I didn't know we were going to get into morality just yet.
Yeah, because...
This is something that I have been wanting to address. What do you need moral standards for?
Okay. Do you agree?
What do you need something governing your... Are you afraid that you're going to kill someone if you don't have moral standards? Is it...
Well, if you don't have moral standards, are you okay with killing someone? And dropping moral standards?
Should it come up where you have to kill someone? Then yes.
For what?
See, moral standards only lead to self-condemnation or condemnation of others. They lead to judgments. They don't necessarily govern what you do, but how you look at what you've done. If it came up where you had to kill someone, they had a gun to your head, or about to kill you, but you had the opportunity to kill them first, I'm certain you would.
That's not a moral. That's not where morals kick in. Morals kick in on everyday life, where you're going, wow, I really am pissed off at this person, and I feel like killing them. And you go, hey, why not? Where do we
So without a moral
this?
standard, you think you would actually go for it?
There are people in this world that would, yes, if they didn't have the moral standard. And human nature...
I think that's more fear of punishment.
Well, human nature has a natural consciousness where we do feel right and wrong. That's not conditioned. That is the same worldwide through...
You think so?
Yes, definitely. It's definitely the same. If you travel anywhere in the world, there are certain things... It's not the same laws and rules, like you can't skateboard on the sidewalk. That's going to change everywhere you go. But the things where it's care about people, love people, show them things, generosity. There is such thing as nice and bad. There is such thing as good and bad, evil and positive and negative. There really are in this world.
Now, I'd say those are interpretations on reality.
But there are really things as positive and negative because every single person feels something if you smile at them. No matter where you are in the world, if somebody smiles, they don't frown back at you.
No, if someone's in a bad mood, they're going to be like, oh, what's that guy so happy about? That pisses me off even more.
Yeah, it's perception, but the point is still...
They don't feel good about it. So that's not a
someone is
thing.
more apt to smile if you're smiling than not. So what does that not have an effect on the world as the way things are? Positive and negative. That is a real natural characteristic. That's real.
As a real universal interpretation of a smile. See, again, it's
just an
interpretation.
example.
A smile is the reality.
But why do people feel fear then? Fear is not taught. Fear is innate.
Fear is a primordial emotion.
So why do we feel fear if there's no such thing as good and bad? Why do we have emotions? Why are we granted emotions for our bodies if there's no such thing as good and bad? Because there would be no...
Because of thought. Because of the illusions that we've tricked ourselves into. Primordial fear, like you're about to get hit by a car and you jump back real quick, that is instinctual. That is universal.
Right.
But these fears of what other people think, these fears of what's going to happen tomorrow, these fears
that's
of...
conditioned.
Yes, absolutely. That is thought-based.
But that's what I'm saying. So if we're not supposed to stick to any standard, then why is it that there are natural standards that are obvious? Because once we get out of spirituality...
You think a tiger feels bad when it kills a gazelle?
No, I don't. That's my exact point, is there's natural laws. However, humans do. Naturally. We don't have to condition that. We just naturally feel bad if we kill someone else.
And I think that's all part of identity, which is completely natural. The most that you can say about your natural identity, without anything else put on top, is human being. Mm-hmm. And through that, we are connected to every other human being.
Definitely.
We identify with other humans as we do ourselves. I see what you're getting at now. So yes, I would agree that having to kill someone else would be... I don't know what I'm getting at.
There's some sort of code, right?
I don't even have a word for it.
There's an underlying law or code or something we don't quite understand that's in our DNA. Literally, when we're born, there are things we are apt to do. Just like getting up and walking, we are apt to react positively or negatively or smile or frown. Even emotions controlling us shows that there is positive and good and effects on everything, meaning that there is a spiritual world that creates the outside world for us.
You think so?
Definitely. Definitely. Meaning that if I sit here and I think, okay, here's a perfect example. I think I used this maybe in the first or second one. You're walking along, you drop your iPhone, it shatters. Mm-hmm. And you're the type of person that goes, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Everything is going wrong, right? This is your mindset. This is how you're viewing the situation. Remember, an iPhone just fell and broke the screen. Doesn't mean good or bad.
Okay, so that... Go ahead.
But now it starts raining and you go, oh my gosh, you kidding me? What else can go wrong? And then type 2 person, which there's more different types of people. We're just classifying it. Walks along, breaks their screen. It starts raining. They go, oh my gosh, what else can I be blessed with today? This is the most amazing thing in the world.
That's clearly not a universal thing.
That's what I'm saying. They're thoughts. You asked me if spiritual world has repercussions on the physical world, and definitely, because they're thoughts, which are actually spiritual, which we'll get into, like we just said, in a later show. led to a difference in not only their physiology, their emotions, how they acted towards other people, how they treated and connected with the world the entire day, probably week, probably year, added years onto their life. So that one thought, that one moment had so many repercussions. And there's such thing as guilt too, and that goes back to those natural laws. We feel guilt when we do wrong things. There are
because we judge ourselves as wrong.
Well, there are conditioned
guilts.
Because
of our moral standards.
Right, there are conditioned guilts, and then there are natural guilts, which are...
What's a natural guilt?
A natural guilt would be you killing someone, and you naturally just feel bad because of the connection between people. Not even because of conditioning that's happened, but naturally as an innate idea. For some reason, we have this built-in right and wrong. And that's the difference between us and animals. It's why we have the ability of choice. Because there is a right and wrong. Otherwise, we wouldn't have choice.
Okay. I get what you're saying, I guess, and I still think it is the identity thing. Like, you don't see tigers killing other tigers, or a lion killing a lion, because they, even in nature, are connected to their fellow species, because it's what they naturally identify with, even if they don't have the thought of identifying as a tiger.
Right.
You know? Just like, at our core, naturally, all we can truly say about every one of us is we are human beings. So to kill another human being is to kill essentially another part of ourself, an extension of our identity.
Exactly. And even without the identity, like you said, a tiger doesn't look at another tiger and go, I can't kill him, he's a tiger.
It's just a natural thing because there is no thought behind it.
Right. So there is some sort of underlying natural law. So I just want to add this because you have a really good point with what you said. Well, is attaching to things. And we definitely have to talk about above the natural level. Because when we get into cars and society and money and all that stuff, oh my gosh, is what you just said the most true thing in the world. If you have a Ferrari, you're happy, right? Like, come on.
Thrill.
Yeah, let's go. Then it all changes. Once you get past the natural thing, that's what I wanted to get in there, then everything is definitely subjective.
I don't want to leave the subject of moral standards just yet. These moral standards that we have, whether it's from an outside source, whether it's law or parents or what other people think of us, at a certain level of spirituality, you awaken out of that, and then you create your own internal moral authority, and it's the same thing. It's still like creating your own outside God. Yes. That watches over everything you do, and it's just you judging you, and you judge other people by the same thing.
Exactly.
You develop a spiritual ego based on it.
Yes, this is very true. And yet again, it's something it's weird because you can't get away from this thing where we have to attach ourselves to something. In order for us to speak about ourselves, we have to be aligned with a set of ideals. Because remember, words are ideas. So to even talk to ourselves, we have to attach ourselves to a line of ideas that are defined by words, because otherwise you would just sit there with yourself in silence.
See, I also want to get into ideals at some point, but again, I don't think we have to be attached to these ideals. Maybe for a limited amount of time, but we still go on and flow with life's experience, and we're not
develop, yes.
Right. We're not emotionally attached to them.
Right.
But we do hold them for as long as they are relevant to our experience.
Yes.
I just want to explain that minute difference.
Definitely, because we do grow and develop. And it's like the Sparrow thing, right? And how I brought up the walking, or rather it starts really with crawling, then walking, and then running, right? You don't look back at those other things and go, man, I wish I didn't learn what I have now because that was so much better. Come on, it's like, it's the natural progression of the world is realizing that there is another level.
There's a story about going into spirituality. It's like walking into a dark tower. You start walking up the steps, and as you start walking, the steps below you start falling away. So you couldn't turn back even if you wanted to. So you have to keep going up until you're left with just you.
Exactly, and I strongly believe that's a great visualization for this situation, because also, if you stop somewhere in that tower and you're standing on one of those steps, really, you got to understand, you're right on the edge, and you could very easily fall back down and start from ground zero, and then you got to build the steps and walk back up.
I don't think it's possible to fall back down, though. If you get to a certain point where you're above the illusion looking down on it, and I don't think it's possible to go back into it like, oh, I was so much happier before I was aware of all this stuff.
True,
like,
true, yeah.
You can't unlearn it.
That's very true. Once you get the awareness, I guess that would have been more a visualization for the average person, which is what I was thinking of, which is where they can fall down the stairs and rebuild because they don't understand that they're in control of the entire visualization in the first place.
When you don't have the awareness and you're just trying to build towards something you think will make you happy that is an outside source.
Yes, that's a great clarification, Corey.
There was another thing I wanted to say. Oh, the concepts and ideals thing. Mm-hmm. I wanted to emphasize not to attach firmly, permanently, concretely to an ideal because that's very dangerous. Those people that stand up for their beliefs and ideals no matter what else is presented to them, you get the Muslim terrorist. You get, the person that would not only die for their beliefs, but would kill for their beliefs. And that doesn't lead to happiness. That leads to upset and anger anytime your set of beliefs is attached because you see yourself as that belief, as that thought.
And I don't want to go back to this, but I just want to tie on something to what we're moving along with right now. Strangely enough, this comes back to progression, which comes back to survival of the fittest. It really does, and it's a natural law. It's so interesting that natural laws actually govern the same things that we're talking about. There's a natural law that literally states those who grow and develop will last. Those who do not grow and develop will no longer be relevant, or i.e. extinct. So you look at dinosaurs, they couldn't adapt to the modern world, so they died. Right? You look at certain animals today, they can't adapt to the rate at which they're being hunted, so they die off. And if we attach ourselves to an idea and we do not evolve with our new ideas and we don't progress as our personal self spiritually, mentally, and physically, because we have to understand, if you're overweight and you're telling yourself you're skinny, you're delusional. You are not actually, you're not actually skinny because your spiritual mind tells you you're skinny. You're not in touch with this tool and this creation in the modern world like, we think we would be.
Right. In order to get to that image of skinny, you have to first accept that there is a problem. Not a problem per se, not an emotional problem, but, that you are somewhere you don't want to be. You have to accept that you're there before you can get to the other place. And there was one thing that I, again, am going back to because I forgot to say it when we were on it. But concepts and labels, it's like, and this also applies to identities with people, but it's like saying that you could show someone a river by scooping some of the water into a bucket and showing them that and saying this is part of the, well, it's not flowing, but
right.
Then you just have still water. It's no longer a river.
Mm-hmm.
So if you make yourself that way, if you make yourself into your identity, you are freezing yourself as a concept, as an ideal. You know what I'm saying?
I totally get it, but I got to challenge it once again because there's no way that we can live in this world and not attach ourselves to some ideas about ourselves. It's literally impossible because in order for you to explain that you have no ideas, you just explained that you still are attached to the idea that you are not attached to ideas. There is no getting around this because we use words. And words are labels.
And if you're attached to your words, then yes, that makes sense.
If you speak, if you talk at all, unless you're mute, you cannot actually be forgiven of this idea that you are not attaching labels to things or yourself. Because for someone to talk to you, they may say, oh, you believe in Buddhism, so you're a Buddhist. And you go, no, I live a Buddhist lifestyle. Okay? You just attach a label to yourself and you go, well, I mean, I don't live a Buddhist lifestyle. I just exist. Okay? You're still attaching. So no matter what, we have to label ourselves to communicate with other human beings. That's the only way we can communicate is through labels.
Right. They're fantastic for communication, but that doesn't mean that psychologically you have to identify with them. You're only in danger when you psychologically insist on, I have to be this thing. That's what I'm saying. You can tell if you're attached to something, if you get personally hurt when something outside of yourself is attacked.
So you're saying emotionally, you will feel emotions.
Yes.
Okay, so if someone says, I'm a Buddhist, and you say, okay, well,
Buddhism's dumb, they'd be like, hey, wait a second,
right.
Then that's when you can tell they've got a a personal, psychological, emotional attachment to it.
Okay, so what would you say, though, if that person lives by principles that guide them in order to live a life that is even emotionally free? Even if they don't have an emotional reaction when it's challenged, what is that
If
saying?
you're living by any principles or guidelines to live a certain way, then you're not free. You're living by established principles.
But then there's an even principle. We'd be creating a principle that says I don't live by principles then. And that's
if you want to call it a principle.
Well,
see, when you get to a certain point, you rise above words, even. When you come to see reality as it is, Alan Watts said this, get out of your mind and into your senses.
This is true.
Rise above the mind and the thoughts and the words, and don't be any of those things that you talk about yourself with, even though you will still talk to people, because you'd be a terrible bore if you if you just didn't talk to people.
Exactly.
Like, right now, you could say my identity is podcast speaker on Let Go Radio. That is what I'm currently doing. After I shut this off and close my laptop and go sit in my car and drive home, I'm then a driver on my way home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I walk in my apartment, I sit on the couch. My identity could be watching TV. It could be reading a book. My identity isn't just firmly on podcast recorder, because then who am I? Like, am I lost if I'm not currently recording a podcast?
Right.
That's the general idea.
Now, so what I'm getting to with all this back and forth stuff, really, is that in order for you to live a life of freedom, you have to base your life off of principles. And
That's the opposite of what I said.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. You have to, because you have a principle to not live by principles. That's a principle. And just because I'm using the word to describe it, you have to use a word to describe it. Otherwise, you sit here in silence. And you can't say anything about anything, because then you are nothing. Meaning, and I believe we're nothing. I believe we're just a blip on the radar, a small spot on the timeline. But in order for us to speak...
I do not agree with that, for the record.
Well, in order for us to speak, you can't not identify yourself with stuff. For one thing, I'm a human being.
Which is the most you can say about a permanent identity for yourself.
But it can't be, because your decisions based in the future, even that you're making now for the future, are based off of principles, things that guide your decisions. If you don't have those bumpers, if you don't have those guidelines, you just became an animal. You literally just became an animal that reacts to everything. And it would be great not to have to think, but at the same time...
When you come to this certain stage of awareness, and you rise above these kinds of things, you'll do a lot less reacting. A lot less from an emotional state, and a lot more acting. You'll take action rather than reacting and defending and explaining.
But those are based off of principles. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that no matter what...
You could outline what you call principles for anything. That doesn't mean that a person has to have them outlined for themselves.
Unless you want them to make... What kind of decisions are they going to make? If you didn't have any of the
natural ones from the heart instead of from the mind.
Right. So there's
another quote. The mind is a terrible thing. Waste it.
So there's still then there's still identity. There's still attachment. These things have to exist for someone to exist, because you can't. You have to go live in a cave, not communicate with anybody.
Well, then you're a cave dweller, and that's.
right. That's my point exactly. There is no such thing as no labels, identity, attachment, principles to live off of, moral codes. These things exist. Now,
see, you're just talking syntax. You're talking to talk. When I say things like labels and attachments and identities, I'm saying to free yourself from them for your own psychological and emotional health. Sure, for purposes of conversation, for being grammatically correct or whatever you want to call it, you could be like, oh, well, that's an identity right there. As long as there's no emotional attachment to it, that's the idea.
I think there's such thing as an emotional awareness and an emotional control, and that you will still feel emotions, and emotions are healthy.
Oh,
yeah.
If I have any way said not to feel emotions, that was a mistake and not at all what I implied. What I was
because you should feel good emotions when you agree with something.
You should feel bad emotions at any point too.
Yes, and
the idea would be not to resist your emotions, and that is something I want to get into at another point as well.
Definitely,
just to go straight into the heart of the emotion and not avoid it. Be completely alive. Be a living person.
Exactly. And feel and live and enjoy. But make sure that our lives have to be governed by something. Because if they're not, then we become animals. So the question
Your life is governed by anything you're controlled.
That, yes, but if it's not governed by anything, it's also not controlled.
It's free.
Yes, but in a bad way, it can be a bad thing. So there are ways to live.
If you judge it as that, we're going in circles.
No, because then you become an animal, which, exactly, we're going in circles, that's my point. And you don't want to be an animal. Nobody here wants to be an animal. They might enjoy the looks of how a dog may enjoy life.
See, now, we covered this towards the beginning. Even if when you don't identify with anything, don't have labels for yourself or anything, you don't suddenly unlearn everything that you've come to know up to this point.
Right. However, if you have no governing ideals or attachments or anything to anything, then all of a sudden, you are a free-floating form through the universe, which sounds great. And I understand how you're going to take that. You're going to say, oh, that's a good thing. That's what I want to be.
No. What I was going to say is, you say governing principles and such for your life.
Yes. For your thoughts, for your thought processes.
If I can elaborate on this a little further. I don't mean, what I mean is not to have anything, any overarching permanent things for your life that are completely unchanging. They should be open to change as experience should call for it. As things happen, anything that you have in your mind should not be rigid and stuck. It should be able to flow and move as it needs to allow for that next thing.
Well, because what I'm talking about when I have this in mind, so maybe this will clarify things that you brought that, now that you brought that up.
Because you would still have things, I guess, governing you.
Right.
But it wouldn't need to be a permanent thing that you stick to.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not talking about any permanent situation. I'm talking about there has to be governing ideas for your life no matter what. Because otherwise, you don't exist. There is governing things that govern our decisions, our thoughts.
Okay, yes, like we had the idea to have a podcast.
Right.
We're doing that right now. Should we not be doing that in 50 years? If we are, that's fantastic. But, and you're looking back on this and you're like, wow, I can't believe they kept that going for 5,000
right.
episodes. Then, whatever. But, we're not emotionally attached to needing this for our life.
Correct. However, which I agree with totally. So the point I was trying to make is that we have a governing, I want to use a different word because that word is getting old now, but we have something that guides us to things. For instance, that's a perfect example. We talked about this.
I like that wording better, actually.
Weeks ago. What did I say? Guidance? What did I say?
Words, or something that guides us somewhere.
Something that, whatever it is. The point is that we talked about doing this podcast a while ago, right? And now we're doing it. So there was a guidance to our present moment. Something in the past guided us to even our present moment. So there's some sort of guidance within our thought processes because if our thoughts were erratic and we just went with them whatever and we allowed no guidance to our thoughts and feeling full, even though we were secure in ourselves, this could end up being a problem because then you have no path in life. And we could say, well, you're not supposed to have a path in life. That's true. However,
I could actually sum this up very quickly.
Let's go. Let's do it.
The point is that the mind is a terrible master. And you've got to be master of your own mind.
Mm-hmm. You have to guide it.
Right. So that guiding thing is you taking control of your own mind and not letting your thoughts run you.
Correct.
And when you have those kind of permanent identities, attachments,
correct,
labels, concepts that you're stuck to and controlled by, your mind is governing you. So you take control of the mind, and that is what guides you.
Well, it depends, because not necessarily. I don't know. I agreed with everything up until that point, because that actually not so. I don't have to lose the definition or meaning of a sparrow by using the word sparrow. I don't. Just because I use the word sparrow...
No, when did I say that?
Well, originally, the first story you brought up was how, you lose the identity of the thing. You lose the magnificence of...
Magnificence.
There we go. Thank you. Of the sparrow by using the word sparrow. But it's not so, because I can look at a sparrow and enjoy it just as much as before I knew it was a sparrow, and not allow that label to get in the way of me enjoying it.
Now you can, because you've reached a point where you're above words.
That's what I agree with. However, that word and those ideas are still a governance for our mind. It still allows a pathway to occur. We may be in control. We can be in control of the pathway, but that's how we guide it, is through these things. Does that make sense?
You're saying to let your mind be in control?
No. We're in control of our mind using those things.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're still helpful for conversation.
Well, not even just that. Even just to know for yourself.
To know it as a sparrow?
And to talk to yourself, to speak with yourself, to organize. Otherwise, it'd be that thing, that thing, that thing, that thing, that thing.
Or now you're thinking out the universe.
That's what I'm saying.
Why can't it just be reality as it is?
It can be, but we talk to ourselves. That's a reality that we can't snuff out. You talk to yourself. So you have to refer to things as... Otherwise, you'd be like, We'd go back to caveman.
Be enjoying silence within yourself.
Right, but we speak to ourselves. That is something that we didn't design. So how can we... You know what I mean? These are the natural, basic laws that govern everything. And then on top of that, we teach ourselves to control them, to control the guidance of our mind, to help people understand and to make new decisions based off of past experiences and current experiences.
Well, I just want to say, sometimes you just got to let the mind be free. It's done enough.
Definitely.
Let it alone. And you've got to experience that silence at some points.
Oh,
That's where great ideas come from. That's where creativity
agree.
Comes from.
I definitely agree with that.
Like, to look at something without thinking, just on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
Take, 30 seconds and just look without labeling. It's a wonderful experience.
Definitely.
We'll make it last longer if you can, but we'll get into meditation and such in another talk.
I love that. Keep going if you can.
On what?
On what you were just talking about.
Finding silence?
Yeah.
Well, I originally found that through meditation, through various forms, whether it was counting the breaths or now I can just sit and breathe and feel every breath and feel the clothing on my back, feel the chair beneath me. And at first it comes with labeling it and everything, but you listen to sounds and rather than think, oh, I don't like that, or yeah, that sounds good, or you just listen as the sound hits you. You just look at things. You can look at a wall and be like, yeah, that's a white wall, and then just look at something else. Or you could look at I'm looking at your wall, by the way. Look at a white wall, see the light reflecting on it, see the shadows on it. Realize that, oh, that wall isn't just one shade of white, And this all comes through without thought, and I'm putting words to it now, but there are shades of yellow in there, different shades of blue even for reflecting off other things, the shadows on it. Just to look at it without labeling, you can find such beauty in simple things like a human constructed wall. You don't even have to go into nature for this kind of thing.
This is true. And I definitely think that's part of what we're born with too. But we forget it by words, which is what
right,
what you were saying.
Which is kind of what I was leading to.
And
I love your challenges, honestly.
Because I feel that it makes us think on a new level. And I don't even know if we got anywhere with that, and it's a dead end. But
you made me think on different levels.
Well, what's cool is even if we didn't get anywhere with that, we don't have to question anymore because we know where that road goes.
Right.
So even if we come to the conclusion like, you know what, that didn't really solve anything for ourselves, then it's great. It's fantastic because we just cut off a route that we feel that we would like to take in the future to learn something new. We don't have to take that route now because we totally understand it, and we came to a mutual thing to where I actually agree with what Corey's saying. I was just twisting it a little bit and giving him a hard time.
Questions that people might ask, like,
right.
What about this? What about this? You know what'd be cool? If at some point we did a live podcast. Which
that would be awesome.
At some point eventually we will. Yes. And we take callers. Like, hey, if you have any questions about anything we're saying, call in. We'll put you on speaker. Feel free to challenge us. Whatever.
That'd be awesome. And guys, thank you for sticking with us on that one. I know that was a little bit of a mind bender. It was making me think a lot. And I was just looking for all the weaknesses of our own arguments because...
and I love that, honestly. And I'd have done the same back to him, but my mind isn't as sharp as his.
Oh, yeah. No, we're both... this is what we love doing, We love learning, and we want to share. So that is the main idea for this podcast. What time are we at right now?
We're at 50 minutes.
50 minutes?
50 minutes!
Okay.
Ran a little long, but you know what? It's fine. If you stuck with us this long, You rock. Thanks, guys.
That's right. Thank you for tuning in for our third episode of the Let Go Radio.